Well, thank you, Tom, and good afternoon, Ted. Well, let me start with a point that I think Mr O'Brien will agree with, a bipartisan note to get this debate going. That is that this election is a fork in the road when it comes to energy and climate. The Australian people do have a very real choice on May the 3rd. No one could accurately say that both parties have the same positions when it comes to energy. We do have very different plans. On the one hand, our plan, backed by the experts at the CSIRO and our energy operators and regulators. Our plan, which stays the course, with an appropriate mix of more renewable energy, backed by storage, backed by gas peaking and firming, backed by household batteries, transmission and a stable system. And the good news is that this is not a trade-off. The same plan, our plan, is the right plan that delivers the cheapest, most reliable form of energy and reduces emissions in this, the critical decade for our planet. And we've made good progress in our first 3 years. 33% renewable energy on the day we came to office, 46% in the last quarter of last year. And renewables are set to overtake coal as the largest source of our electricity this year. That's good progress, but there's more to do, much more to do. And that's why this election is so important. That's why there's so much at stake, because the Liberal Party wants to stop. They want a radical change in direction. They propose the biggest change in our electricity generation ever. They dismiss the advice of the CSIRO, the energy market operator and the other experts. That's the essential difference of approach. We listen to the experts. Mr Dutton and Mr O'Brien think they know better than the experts. And that's why their plan is so risky for our country. Now, the problems with their plan are many. It's a bizarre approach, frankly, which argues that the answer to needing more, cheaper energy now is to introduce the most expensive form of energy in, by their own admission, 12 years' time. And in reality, we all know, it would be much longer than that. But the problems are even greater. The biggest issue would be the lost opportunities in the meantime. The opposition's modelling makes clear, and to their credit, they're clear about it, they see no role for renewables above 54% of our electricity by 2050. Now, let's put this in perspective. I just mentioned in the last quarter we just hit 46% renewables, and we'll pass 54% sometime in the next 2 years. And then the opposition wants to stop. No more. No more renewables installed between 2026 and 2050. Their modelling shows no room for more household batteries, not community, not grid, not household. They admit they want to run our coal-fired power system for longer and harder. Terrible for emissions, bad for prices, diabolical for reliability. Our coal-fired fleet is aged and ageing fast. It's the most precarious part of our energy system. Today, we have 4.7 gigawatts of coal-fired power broken down today. Not a day in the last 2 years hasn't seen a coal-fired power station break down somewhere in Australia. So they think the way to reduce prices is to introduce the most expensive form of energy into Australia, and they think the way to improve reliability is to lean more on the most unreliable part of our system. The LNP nuclear modelling is a heroic effort to try and make an ill-thought-out and risky scheme look vaguely credible. But their modelling crumbles like a sayo in a blender at the lightest scrutiny. Of all the problems with their policy, the most spectacular is that they rely on Australia needing 40% less electricity to make their plan look around 40% cheaper. So their policy is based on no aluminium smelting, no steel making, no new data centres or AI, and an anaemic take-up of EVs by 2050. Now, what if they're wrong? It would leave our energy system dangerously exposed to shocks and see our economy shrink. Over the last Liberal decade, our opponents presided over 4 gigawatts of dispatchable energy leaving the grid, only replaced by 1 gigawatt of new energy. It left our country exposed. But all that would be a Sunday picnic compared to the damage caused by the Liberals' risky plan now. Now, none of this is easy. This transition is occurring against the backdrop of a global energy crisis, the effect of which, of course, we're still feeling today. And it means that energy prices are, of course, higher than I would have or would like them to be. All of us who get electricity bills, and that's pretty much all of us, see that every quarter. We live it. We know how tough families are doing. That's why we've delivered 3 rounds of energy bill relief, and this week have made one of our biggest election commitments to help families and businesses get a battery which will help them reduce their power bills permanently. The key way to help families with their energy bills is to keep going with our efforts to get more, cheaper, reliable energy connected to the grid now, today, not next decade. Not to stop that effort, to put a stop sign on all the private investment that's flowing into the Australian energy system while we wait for the most expensive form of energy to be ready, perhaps, if we're lucky, in 12 years' time. That's what's at stake at this election. I want to thank Ted for agreeing to this debate. I want to thank you all for coming and participating in this discussion about what is a key issue on May the 3rd, our different plans for Australia's energy future.
Thank you, Mr Bowen. Right on 6 minutes. Mr O'Brien.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Chris. And it's wonderful to be here in a room of so many undecided voters. Tom, with your permission, shall we just proceed and ignore?
Yeah, I'm happy to proceed. Let's go. We might just restart the clock on that, Ruben, and start again. Mr O'Brien.
Well, thank you very much. And Chris Bowen is right about one thing. Indeed, Australia does face a fork-in-the-road moment when it comes to its energy future. Under Labor, that future will see Australia become poorer, weaker and more dependent on foreign supply chains. Under the Coalition, Australia will become richer, stronger and fiercely independent. Energy is life, energy is the economy. Indeed, energy security is national security. And how we manage energy in the years ahead will determine the sort of country we become. It will determine whether or not our children and theirs have the same opportunities which we have as a nation. It is absolutely critical. Now, as you look at those forks in the road, if you want to have a taste of what the fork looks like under Labor, consider the last 3 years and ask yourself, do you feel better off today than you did 3 years ago? Under this Albanese Labor government, Australia has seen its standard of living drop further than any other developed nation on the planet. We have seen productivity drop. We have seen more families go on hardship arrangements with their energy retailer than has ever happened in this country, ever. We've seen more companies close up, shut down. And what is driving a lot of this hardship right across the country is the fact that energy bills are too high. They are soaring. This is what it is going to look like, because it doesn't matter whether it's the market operator, it doesn't matter if it's energy experts. There is no credible commentator in this country suggesting that prices will come down under the Albanese Labor government. Now, up until just recently, Chris Bowen, Anthony Albanese and the rest of the Labor Party, they would justify their all eggs in one basket renewables only plan on an economic model. They claimed that prices were going to come down, and they set all of these targets on the basis of that economic model. But the Prime Minister only a couple of weeks ago decided to throw that economic model out. Gone. That Reputex modelling, all over now, which means here we are, walking into the next election, and neither Chris Bowen nor Anthony Albanese have any economic basis whatsoever for their energy plan. They are at sea, with indeed the most radical plan to change our energy system that not only this country has ever seen, but the world has ever seen. There is not a country in the world trying to go down the path that Labor is trying to go down, a predominantly wind and solar grid. This is unheard of. And already early days it is failing. It's failing on every single count. And Australians know that because they're feeling the pain. Families are on their knees because they can't pay the bills. They're compromising their spend at home for the kids, for themselves. Businesses know it because they're closing up. And it only gets worse from here. Now, the Prime Minister calls this his own, and I quote, industrial revolution. The Treasurer says he is obsessed when it comes to his renewables-only plan, and Chris often talks about how his decisions are made by his gut. I mean, seriously, you don't muck around with an energy system, which is precisely what is happening, with not a skerrick now of an economic basis behind it. Now, the Coalition's plan is very different. A Coalition's plan is based on engineering and economics. Under our plan, in the short term, one, we do not believe that we should be closing our baseload power stations prematurely, unlike Labor, which is happy to close one system without having another one ready to go. Two, we believe we need to pour more gas into the market, more gas, and a lot of it, and get it to where it needs to be. Australian gas for Australians first. And three, we believe that we need to continue with renewables and storage, but in a sensible way, one that doesn't fight against regional communities but carries them with us. Then, in the near term, our plan is to replace retiring coal plants with zero-emissions nuclear energy, bringing us back to where we should be, lined up with other advanced economies around the world. And unlike Labor, we've done the work, we've done the modelling, and we have a plan. And under our plan in the short term, we will see gas prices coming down. For industry by 15%, households 7%, and for wholesale electricity 8%, or your bill at home electricity 3%. And then along the journey to 2050, that future that will determine the life for next generations of Australians, under our plan, it is 44% cheaper than Labor's plan. The Coalition will not spend $264 billion, which Labor plans to spend as part of its experiment of all eggs in one basket, renewables only. I believe our balanced energy mix is what will ultimately deliver Australia a future where we are rich, not poor, where we are strong, not weak, and where we are fiercely independent and not dependent on foreign supply chains.
Thank you, gentlemen, both for your opening addresses. I'll go to the floor in a few minutes. A few of my own, first of all, and beginning on price. So, Mr Bowen, before the last election, you pledged energy bills to be $275 cheaper by the end of the term. What price pledge can you offer before this election, not compared to any coalition policies, but compared to the latest forecast prices? Will they go up or down?
Well, Tom, the pledge I do give is that energy prices will be cheaper under us than under Mr O'Brien. That is the pledge, because that is what we can state categorically based on the two plans. Look, anybody who predicts energy prices in this very complicated geopolitical environment, I think, is making a punt. So I'm not going to do that. I am going to say that when the alternative plan is to introduce the most expensive form of energy available in the world, which is nuclear, that's going to have an impact. And worse, while we're waiting for that, they're going to sweat the coal assets for longer and harder. And one of the things we've seen in the Australian Energy Regulator's report constantly is one of the things that drive higher prices and price spikes is unexpected outages in coal-fired power. I've told you, we've got 4.7 gigawatts of those today as it happens. That puts huge pressure on energy prices. You're going to see more of that under the Liberal plan and less of that under ours. Our plan is based on the right mix of renewables, not, as Ted mischaracterises it. We have a very carefully balanced plan based on all the expert advice, which is the lowest cost pathway, as has been outlined by...
But if there's someone out there wondering what happens to their bill, you can't say whether it will go up or down compared to today's prices?
Well, clearly you're going to see, you've seen Australian Energy Market Commission reports showing 13% reduction over 10 years. If we keep going with the current plan, that's not an election pledge, to be clear, but that is the expert view of the analysis of the work that we are doing and rolling out.
Okay. Mr O'Brien, you have made a price pledge, 7% reduction on household gas bills, as you alluded to, 3% electricity. To be clear on measuring this, is that cheaper than the latest forecast prices? And when do we measure it by? Is it by the final year of a term in office if the coalition wins power?
Tom, the analysis done independently by Frontier Economics looks at the 25-26 year. and that is the basis upon which those estimates are made of 15% lower gas prices for industry, 7% for households and 8% for wholesale electricity, which flows through around about 3%, all things being equal, to electricity bills. Now, it's notable that I can actually give you those figures because, unlike Chris's answer to you just then, they don't have anything. They've done no economic modelling. As I mentioned before, his decision-making is based on gut. The Treasurer of the country is obsessed, his own words, and the Prime Minister, in his own words, says he's creating an industrial revolution. They don't have any economic modelling. We've done the economic modelling. It's based on a comprehensive plan. We've released that. Certainly the comparison of the electricity grid, national electricity grid through to 2050, we released last year, and of course the gas policy only recently.
Okay, but that's the short term. What about by the end of the term? Do you have any pledge you can make on prices, or would you agree with Mr Bowen it's too difficult to go that far?
The modelling has been done for the first year. But now, when it comes to future years, I know why the question is so important, Tom, because the Albanese government went to the election last time promising a $275 reduction in household power bills. $275. I don't know how many times I asked Chris about that in the parliament. Refused to ever concede that won't happen. That was meant to happen this year. In his own electorate, power bills have gone up by $1,300 more than what Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese had promised them. The Treasurer last night could not even bring himself to say a simple word, sorry. Sorry we got it wrong. Sorry we promised you all through even the term of government a $275 reduction in household bills, but actually you're paying well over $1,000. And I hope Chris takes the opportunity today just to look down the barrel of the camera and say, Australians, we got it wrong. Sorry.
Okay. Mr Bowen, the coalition plan on gas just released and the modelling is essentially based on the premise of we don't have a short-term issue with gas supply. It's about prioritising it for Australians and at an affordable price. What do you think? Do we have a gas shortage or not?
Well, Tom, you mentioned opposition modelling, which I think is a generous term. I mean, this is the document. I've seen more detailed menus in a Chinese restaurant than this document. This is clearly policy on the run. It's been written after the budget reply. And in fact, this document makes clear that the opposition is not proposing an East Coast gas reservation. They say East Coast gas reservation scheme operates by providing an incentive for gas producers to offer gas to the domestic market. An incentive? Well, that's not a reservation. I mean, the closest thing we have to a reservation is our gas code of conduct, which has seen 640 petajoules of guaranteed supply. So this is a joke of a document. And in fact, it reflects very much Angus Taylor's gas-fired recovery, released in 2020, word for word. If you do a word search, you'll find it's almost a carbon copy. On the day that Mr Taylor released that, gas prices were about $4 a gigajoule. By the time of the election, they were $34.70. I mean, well done, Angus. That's the best they could do. So why would we think the plan that they implemented in 2020 would go any better in 2025?
If you're going to fix a problem, you've got to diagnose it, though. Do we have a gas shortage, in your view?
We have an issue with domestic gas supply, yes. Now, people say, well, we've got plenty of gas in Australia, and that is true, and a lot gets exported. Those export contracts were written 20 years ago, foundational contracts. I'm not going to, I imagine Mr O'Brien's not going to, rip them up. That would be unconstitutional for a start and highly irresponsible. What we do need to do is work with the gas companies to get more gas flowing domestically. I think we would agree on that. That's what we've done, 640 petajoules. That's why I don't understand Mr O'Brien's point that somehow 100 petajoules would fix the problem when we, Madeleine King, me, Ed Husick, Jim Chalmers, working together, have got 640 petajoules of extra gas supply guaranteed to the domestic market.
Mr O'Brien, your policy focuses on the three exporters in Queensland and aims to get that extra 100 petajoules secured at that price. One of them, the Santos GLNG project, actually buys 150 petajoules from the Australian domestic market because it doesn't have enough in its supply to fill its export contracts. Am I right in thinking your policy does nothing about that anomaly, which is affecting the domestic market?
Tom, on the contrary, our policy actually tackles that anomaly front on. And you are dead right. There are three major exporters out of Queensland, and one of them actually takes gas from the domestic market in order to sell internationally. We've been very clear that the obligations on the 3 gas exporters are obligations that will rest on each of their shoulders. There will be no free riding. That has been made very clear, and I'm happy to clarify it today. And it's clear. Sorry.
Santos doesn't export. The key thing you're focusing on is uncontracted gas. Santos doesn't export that. So that policy won't affect them. That levy won't affect them.
So we've made it very clear that within the first 100 days of government, we'll be settling new arrangements with the gas industry. That includes all 3. We cannot continue to have a situation where we have one of our major gas consortium taking from the domestic market and making negative contributions. That will be part of the negotiations that will take place with the gas industry.
So that will actually take aim at Santos and limit them? Is that what you're saying?
That will involve all 3 consortia.
Okay.
Santos is part of one. And again, Tom, this is all laid out in a very comprehensive policy, a costed policy, the one to which Chris just mentioned and very cleverly said, what was he? He's read longer, menus at Chinese restaurants. And this is coming from the minister, whose own plan wouldn't fit in a Chinese fortune cookie. If anything, that's probably where it would belong, because you'd crack it open and all it would be a slogan.
Well,
no numbers, no plan, no modelling. It's just a slogan. But they're going to create an industrial revolution because they're obsessed, and he's making decisions on gut.
Well, let's deal with that, because Ted's made a point. So here's his gas modelling. I use the term lightly. And here's the frontier nuclear modelling. I've put post-it notes on all the mistakes. So that's it. That's the modelling that the opposition proposes. Here is a small example of the reports that the government bases our expert plan on, whether it is by the AEMO, the Australian Energy Regulator, the Australian Energy Market Corporation, full analysis of the pathway that the government has set out, because we base our plan on the experts. The work of the Australian Energy Market Operator, the work of the CSIRO, the Australian Energy Market Corporation. As I said, the difference between Ted and I is neither of us are the people in Australia who know the most about the energy market. There are others. I listen to them. Ted ignores them.
I feel sorry for Reputex. I mean, the Prime Minister just threw out Reputex's model, and then Chris Bowen rocks up and goes, but we've got a new set. And the new set actually isn't even Labor modelling. It comes from the market operator. And that modelling says the total system cost of Labor's plan through to 2050, total system real cost is, Chris Bowen, how much is your plan going to cost, according to the documents you just pulled out? Total system cost, real cost, not net present values or anything like that.
Can't say not net present value. Net present value 121 billion as is outlined.
No, real cost.
But
cost.
You carry on about
real cost.
Ted, you make the point about Reputex. Well, look, this is the 2025 election. I know you're trying to refight the 2022 election. I get that. This is the 2025 election. Now, we did release Reputex modelling. What Reputex modelling did not predict is the war in Ukraine. It did not predict that Angus Taylor would have a 20% electricity bill rise, that he would change the law to hide. He denied that last night. It's a matter of fact.
So how much does it cost?
I might jump in here. We're throwing a lot.
So we are now fighting the 2025. Here's your election.
We're throwing a lot of. I'm going to jump in. We're throwing a lot of numbers around.
It's not on your website.
Let me put something to each of you, Mr O'Brien, Mr Bowen. Let me put something to each of you, because a lot of numbers are coming around.
My simple question to the Minister, he could not answer. He just lifted up. He's got multiple folders. In that folder, he should be able to tell us what is the total system cost to get to 2050, which is exactly what those documents tell us. Minister, are you going to give the Australian people an answer? I'm telling you, our plan is going to cost $331 billion.
Well, no, it's not.
Generation, storage and transmission. How much is yours going to cost?
That's based on your frontier modelling.
How much is yours going to cost?
I'm going to definitely jump in now and not take no for an answer.
He cannot tell you the cost.
Let me ask you a simple question each, and we'll see if we can get agreement on this, because numbers in this matter, and frankly, voters get pretty confused. So, Mr O'Brien, the nuclear cost, even your own modelling, like for like, the same energy, isn't suggesting yours will be 44% cheaper than Labor. It's 21%. So you can argue around modelling, but even your modelling says 21%. Will you stop saying 44%, because that compares much more energy Labor would produce under their plan compared to yours?
Tom, with due respect, I'm conscious I'm debating Chris and not you, but actually if it's the exact same amount of electricity you want to produce, the modelling looked at two scenarios. In both scenarios, once you put nuclear into the mix, it's actually 25% cheaper. 25% cheaper.
It's not 44.
Well, where 44% becomes relevant is Labor wants to build an electricity grid based on assumptions in the very documents Chris has there, actually, which says that come 2050, everybody is driving EVs, like everyone is driving an EV. Therefore, you have to overbuild the grid to accommodate that. They believe that green hydrogen is going to be so big, you need to almost double the size of the grid just
like for
that.
like, it's not 44, is it?
Yes, it is. You know why? Because you're comparing our plan, which is not to overbuild the grid, to Labor's plan to overbuild the grid. So
Labor's plan includes
money would be spent?
Exports, which you get money from. Anyway, that's my attempt on that one. I'll try this time now. $600 billion is the figure you've quoted a lot. The CSIRO Next Gen report found the cost of nuclear, just the actual building cost, would actually be $116 billion. Isn't that a better authority to use than the lobby group Smart Energy Council, which has thrown up to $600 billion? Not $600 billion, but up to.
Well, Tom, I don't agree with respect the premise of the way you've asked the question, because absolutely the CSIRO should be the organisation we listen to. Mr O'Brien claims they've used the CSIRO. That's not true. It's just not right. The frontier modelling does not reflect CSIRO costings at all. And if it did, why would the alternative Deputy Prime Minister, Mr Littleproud, at the beginning of this campaign, in a most, I must say, I don't use the term lightly, improper intervention, alleged that the CSIRO was engaging with political interference from me? It was a grave insult to the CSIRO, and he and Ted on his behalf should apologise. What the opposition has done is use frontier modelling to ignore the CSIRO on operating costs, to ignore the CSIRO's point about first-of-kind costs, to ignore the CSIRO's point about the cost of refurbishing nuclear reactors as they go. They certainly haven't taken into account the cost of refurbishing coal, if you're going to rely on it longer. They've pushed a lot of the cost on beyond 2050. You know, they cut the limit off at 2050. So the 600... Sorry?
It's pulling this back to that figure of 600. That is an absolute maximum figure quoted by one lobby group.
You could argue it's conservative, but it's because of the cost blowouts we've seen overseas. Ted says when he's asked about how can you ensure there's no cost blowouts in Australia, he says, I've done my homework, which I do find,
600
I find pretty
all the worst
dismissive.
cost blowouts from the worst projects.
Well, no, I think it's a very carefully calibrated real-world cost example.
Top end one, absolute top end.
No, I think that you could make...
But that group, the top end was 600, the bottom was 120.
Well, as I said, they've done real-world examples based on an analysis of what has been happening around the world. When Mr O'Brien claims
Tom,
that he
this is
respects
important.
the
Very briefly, before I go to
Can I
Greg
please
Brown?
come in on this? So, you notice that Chris Bowen could not answer the question. He can't explain the $600 billion. He can't explain it. In his opening remarks, and even just then, he talked about the importance of listening to the CSIRO. If you look at the capital cost of a nuclear program under the CSIRO, Chris Bowen and the Labor Party are multiplying that by a factor of 5 to get to $600 billion. It is an utter lie. Under our plan, it will be up to $120 billion, which is consistent with the CSIRO.
Okay.
They have multiplied it by 5. It is an outright lie. And can I say, you know you've got your political opponents on the ropes when the best argument they can come out with is a complete and utter lie.
Well, again, I don't know.
Before I get to Greg,
if Ted is now wrapping himself in the CSIRO, I don't know why Mr Dutton and Mr Littleproud, let's say Ted to be fair, have been most improperly impunging the CSIRO. What you've ignored in the CSIRO report is you have not counted their first-of-kind premium.
But our policy is not first of a kind.
Well, it is in Australia, Ted. It is in Australia. We don't have any nuclear reactors. It will be first of kind. That's a rather large admission.
Chris doesn't know the policy. We've been very clear Australia should not be adopting first-of-a-kind reactors. It's next-of-a-kind. So, Chris, please, maybe read the
on that point,
Ted, if you're building a reactor in Australia, first-of-a-kind in Australia, I'm sorry you've missed that point.
Greg Brown will never forgive me if he doesn't get a question now. He's from the Australian newspaper.
Greg Brown from the Australian. Just a slightly different question for each of you on 2030 targets. Mr Bowen, you've said that the Reputex modelling isn't relevant anymore because circumstances have changed. And why is it? What is your justification for sticking with the 2030 targets for both renewables and emissions reductions that you directly plucked from that modelling? And Mr O'Brien, Mr Dutton has said that a coalition government will not stick with a 43% emissions reduction target. Does that mean you will change Australia's target at Paris to lower it? And does it mean that you will repeal legislation, the 43% legislation that Mr Bowen introduced?
Who would you like to go first, Tom?
You begin on Mr Bowen.
43, because we're on track to meet it. Very close now, 42. In accord with the last figures I released, which is prepared at arm's length from me. That's a great national achievement. 26 to 28 when it came to office, lifted now to 42. Bit of work to do to get to 43, but a very big step forward. And that is in our national interest. It's important for the planet, but also it's important because we believe that the best way we can future-proof the Australian economy and create the jobs of the future is to lead the world in our efforts in relation to making sure that our goods are decarbonised and that we can honestly compete in a world which is demanding those decarbonised efforts. So 43 is an appropriate level. There have been plenty of people, including some friends outside, who would say it should be higher. It's substantially higher than what the coalition could achieve, and I'm very proud of the fact we're now back on track to achieve it.
But in fairness, when there's a debate about these targets, including the business community being increasingly uncomfortable about the 82% target, your government is saying we're going to stick with these targets, but you've abandoned the modelling that you took it from.
No, we've pointed out that modelling was done in 2021, and there's some things that they could not have been expected to predict. But nevertheless, the policies that we've put in place have got us on track for 43 and got us on track for 82. I mean, a while ago there was commentary saying we might not meet 82, and I understood that, respect that.
That's what many experts still say, you're not on track for 82.
No, well, you'll find many experts say that we are now on track.
Climate Change Authority said you needed more policies even in November.
Well, look at the Clean Energy Council's latest data, which says explicitly Australia is now back on track for 82. I think that's a good thing. You might disagree.
Mr O'Brien, question 2 from Greg that he asked.
Will you change Australia's international commitment?
Greg, it's interesting listening to Chris Bowen because Labor will often say that it's so important that it has its climate change and energy policies. They know Australians are hurting right now. They know businesses are shutting down. But they probably, hand on heart, believe they're saving the planet. When they came to office, the Coalition had reduced emissions by 29% on 2005 levels. You know what it is today? Around 29%. They actually haven't budged. This is the problem. Emissions aren't even going down. So our position, to answer your question directly, Labor, the Coalition, nobody in this country will be able to achieve the emission target set by Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese. The difference between Peter Dutton and Anthony Albanese is Peter Dutton has been very honest and upfront about that. Labor continue to lie to the Australian people, including Chris today, oh, we're going to get there. No one thinks they're going to get there, as if they're going to get there.
But does that mean you'll officially lower our nationally determined contribution?
When it comes to what contributions we sign up to, again, we've been very clear. We're going to do something they didn't do. We are actually going to do the analysis, and then we're going to work out what is going to be the impact of emissions reduction on families in Australia, on regional Australia and on businesses in Australia. When Chris Bowen walked into the Parliament and decided to legislate for that target, we put forward a motion to amend it to say, can you at least get the Productivity Commission to first look at the impact in the real world on the Australian people and businesses? He refused to do that. Here we are. We will not be setting targets from opposition. Once we set targets from government, it would be based on, number one, the trajectory of emissions, number two, the state of the economy, and number three, our own suite of climate and energy policies.
You can get one at the end. We've got to move through some more people. You'll be first in the queue for a second, I promise. Melissa Code from the Mandarin.
Thank you both for your speeches. A recent report by the Centre for Policy Development looked at the attitudes towards what the community believes politicians are doing when it comes to short-term policies and long-term policies. And like your reflection in terms of which side you believe addresses both or either of those things. And then a sort of comment on capability. The Coalition's nuclear plan is ambitious, but it's complex. The chance of a complex and ambitious policy standing up and being realised depends on public service capability, and we've seen that in other places around the world where those complex nuclear projects have come to pass. How does that wash with the Coalition's desire to compress the size of the public service?
Melissa, thank you very much for the question. And I think you're right in that Australians are calling out not just for a set of short-term policies, but long-term policies. And I hope that you would understand that the policy suite we have put together, which does involve predominantly pouring more gas in the short term and then nuclear in the long term, hopefully meets that expectation. When it then comes to the importance of the public service, we have been very clear that under our plan, we believe that we need to leverage the existing regulatory architecture, and that includes ARPANSA, which is the regulator. And so, in fact, under our plan, we are recognising the skills and the capability, which, by the way, are renowned around the world as being first class when it comes to nuclear technology as a regulator. So under our nuclear plan, we want to expand ARPANSA so that it has the ability to licence and monitor civil nuclear power plants. We have also said that under our plan, we believe that the Australian people should own those power plants, which would mean a new government business enterprise. We believe Australia has the capability to do nuclear. I know that Chris Bowen and Labor says, oh, we can't do it, we can't do it. We back Australia to do it. And that includes the men and women of the public service. We're pro-Australia. We think Australia has the capability. We already are a nuclear nation, and if we work together with ambition, then we can join other advanced economies and get power prices down with a balanced energy mix, renewables, gas, and as coal exits the system, zero emissions nuclear energy.
In relation to your question about long-term plans, I agree. And I actually think this is an optimistic story for Australia that we can tell and live. What if we get this right? There's plenty of doom and gloom about the impacts of climate change, and it's all accurate. What's at risk and stake is true. But what we can do is say to Australia, here is a vision of our country where we get this right. We seize the opportunities. We have the best renewables in the world. More sunlight hits our country than any other planet in the world. We have above average wind. It would be a massive own goal to ignore that. We can seize it. We can create the jobs of the future. We can create investment. We can help the rest of the world decarbonise with our green hydrogen exports, which Ted doesn't think will ever happen. I think are hard, but will happen. You know, when Ted again criticises me and the Prime Minister for using the term industrial revolution. I'm sorry, it is. It is that big. I don't see that as a bad thing. I see that as a massive opportunity for our country. It doesn't all roll out smoothly like in a linear graph in a glossy document. You have challenges and you have setbacks. You deal with them, you grow the economy, you create jobs of the future, you create jobs so that young people don't have to leave regions. If they live in an energy-producing region, they don't have to leave if they want to stay. We'll create new jobs and new energy.
If it's an industrial revolution you want, Minister, don't you think it might be important to do the economic modelling to tell the Australian people the impact?
Yeah, well, I think it would be.
You've done it a few times.
We have, and it would be better if you did.
Ask each other. If I can jump in here, you can formally ask each other a question here. There have been a few so far, but this is a chance to do it without me trying to interrupt you. You seem very keen to do so, Mr O'Brien. Would you like to ask a question of Mr Bowen?
Well, why don't I ask just that question so it's even clearer to the Australian people, Tom? We know, Minister, that you committed to reduce power bills by $275, and I think we both know that has been a failure. You now say, by bringing out a whole bunch of folders, that you've done the work, or at least the market operator's done work. But no matter how many times I've asked you in this debate so far, you still cannot tell us the real cost through to 2050. Not the NPV, the real cost. Now, if you actually look at AEMO's own spreadsheets and do the calculation, it's well over $600 billion. So my question, therefore, to you, Minister, again, is can you please tell the Australian people the total system cost of your plan to get the national electricity market to net zero by 2050 in real terms?
You've mentioned that I referred to a whole heap of documents, and I have, and I make no apologies for that, because that is the framework that we are basing our policies on. And I make no apologies for pointing out to you that AEMO says the most accurate way, the best way of describing the least cost pathway to net zero, and particularly in our electricity system, is that 122 billion net present value. Now, you can dismiss that. You cherry-pick the figures the way that you want to present them, and that's your right, of course. But that is what the experts say is the best way.
That was my question.
Hang on. I didn't interrupt your question.
Well, it was my question, so I will interrupt you.
Okay.
We're not after the NPV. No one here walks into a shop and says, "Oh, how much is a bottle of milk?" And the shopkeeper says, "Oh, do you want an NPV on that?" No, just tell us how much it costs. So how much is it going to cost?
You can dismiss the way that AEMO says is the most accurate way of describing it. I choose.
I'm criticising the way you're describing it because you're avoiding the question.
You've said why didn't we?
You're avoiding the question.
Why wouldn't you model the economic impact? I would say to that, well, you have, and you have come up with an economy 44% smaller. Electricity use 44% smaller than what we're basing our plan.
We're 44% cheaper, but that's
no. Well, only because it's 44% smaller. Now you could predict a cheaper education system with 44% less students in 2050 if you wanted to. It wouldn't be accurate, but you could do it, and that's exactly what you've done.
Tom, I'm okay giving away some of my time to give Chris Bowen more time if he is prepared to answer the question I asked, which was how much is it going to cost, total system cost, real cost through 2050?
20 more seconds, I'll let him finish and he can...
Well, again, Ted avoids the question about why...
I'm asking the question. Go ahead, answer.
You just said you're going to give up the time, and then you just keep talking.
Go ahead. I'm zipped up.
OK, that's good news. Why would you assume a 44% smaller economy, even if you're right, even if you're correct about that? I'm not here to say that every single thing that AEMO has in 2050 is going to be word for word accurate, but I would work on the basis that they are, which prepares our economy to be as strong and robust as possible. That's what we're doing. That's what you're refusing to do. My question to you, Ted, is that you and I would, I think, both agree that there are people who know plenty about the energy system in Australia. You and I have learnt a lot, but there's plenty of people who've devoted their lives to the economics of the energy system, whether it's a CSIRO, the people who keep our lights on at AEMO, or even people like Bill Gates who promote nuclear overseas but say nuclear is not the right answer for Australia, or Fatih Birol, the Executive Director of the International Energy Agency, who says nuclear has got a place in the world but not Australia. All of them agree that renewable energy backed by gas and batteries is the cheapest option for Australia's unique grids and our opportunities, and nuclear is too expensive. So my question to you is, why do you know better? And if you're in government, would you only listen to people you agree with, and what would you do with the experts who tell you, Minister, you're wrong?
Chris, thanks for the question. What I would do, which is different from how you have managed the energy system, is I'd be led by the engineering and the economics. Unlike the approach that you've taken, we would actually do the work and do the economics. We wouldn't have Peter Dutton out there trying to say we want to have an industrial revolution. We wouldn't have Angus Taylor as the Treasurer saying that he's obsessed with a particular technology. And I can assure you that, unlike you, I wouldn't be saying I'm just making decisions on my gut. In terms of who knows best, there are a lot of people who know a lot of things about energy, And those who are prepared to do the work, do the sums, are the ones to whom we listen. A total system cost analysis has been done, comparing Labor's plan to the Coalition's plan. That comparison shows that the Coalition's plan is 44% cheaper, $264 billion cheaper than Labor's plan. Now, when it comes to what we should look at, what we should consider, it's the engineering, the economics. Now, when it comes to Chris's comments, Chris, you make about, why do you know better? The conclusion the frontier economics reached on looking at nuclear, working with renewables and gas, being 44% cheaper, that's comparable to the United States Department of Energy. They said about 37% when you put nuclear in. When I've sat down with the Japanese department, looking at their details, they say that nuclear in the mix brings prices down. Ontario, Canada, brings prices down. And so, Chris, what is it that Anthony Albanese and you know that the United States doesn't know, Japan doesn't know, Canada doesn't know, the UK doesn't know, the United Arab Emirates doesn't know, India doesn't know, China doesn't know? I mean, seriously, we've got 32 countries in the world today using nuclear energy, another 50 looking at adopting it for the very first time. Why? Because it can work in a complementary way with renewables and with gas and get prices down. But Anthony Albanese and Chris Bowen somehow, despite the fact he hasn't even read the policy, given his previous comments about, first-of-a-kind reactor.
One year's contributor, and I'll ask my questions in turn if I may there, Tom, and I'll start with the Minister, Chris Bowen. Chris Bowen, in December 2021, you commissioned modelling which showed, and you pledged, that you would drop power prices by $275 for residential homes. You committed to it again in April 2022 when you were told that modelling was flawed. You continued to commit to it in 2023 and 2024, even though electricity prices were rising. You continued to be committed to it when you started subsidising power bills. And now this year, as subsidies now have cracked through a new record and they're going through to the end of the year, you're spending billions of dollars on that. You are now claiming that electricity price falls due to subsidies are a fall in an electricity bill. Now, electricity prices are rising, aren't they, Minister? That's written into every electricity bill, isn't it, Minister? And if you can't admit that simple fact here today, why should anyone believe anything that you say?
Well, thanks very much for the question, Chris. I'm not exactly sure what your question is really in reality. You've got strong views about... Sorry, you asked...
Are electricity prices going up
Chris, you asked
or down?
the question. I didn't interrupt you. Yeah, I didn't interrupt your question. Do I get to answer it? Do I get to answer it? Thank you. You've got strong views about these matters, which you express on Sky News in the evenings, and that's your right. I disagree with the way that you look at these matters. I disagree with the approach that you take, respectfully. I think that renewable energy is the cheapest form of energy. You disagree with me. You disagree with the CSIRO. You're perfectly entitled to that point of view. I have said at the outset, in my opening remarks, energy prices are higher than I'd like them to be. Of course they are. I think everyone would say that. I think normal Australians at home also look around the world and know that people around the world are dealing with similar issues. Countries with different policies in place are all dealing with high energy prices. With great respect, it's disingenuous and dishonest of you to blame all this on renewable energy, as you do on Sky in the evenings. It's just not right, sir. It's just not fair. You're entitled to that view.
I'll ask a very, very simple question. Have electricity prices risen on your watch the exact opposite of what you pledged? Have they?
We have never denied that energy prices are higher than we would like. That's why we've delivered 3 rounds of energy bill relief.
In the Treasurer's speech, you wrote, electricity prices have fallen. That's not true, is it?
Well, the fact of the matter is, if you look at the recent data, Australia's had the lowest energy inflation in the world.
Because why?
No,
because of subsidies.
You might deny that, and I know you deny several things.
What is the reason for it? What is the reason for it?
Mr Ewan, are you asking a question or are you debating?
No, it's just that you are completely avoiding it, as you always do. We get a
well, I know you're a man of strong views on these matters, and I said I've always had respect for you, but I have a fundamentally different view to the one that you have developed in recent years, which you express on Sky News.
So if your premise on renewables is true, electricity prices will fall in your next term.
Well, I refer you to the Australian Energy Market Commission report, which says if we keep the path we're on, energy prices would fall by 13% over the next 10 years. You might deny that, I don't.
Question to Ted O'Brien. Ted O'Brien, you want to drop the price of gas. You're trying to get it out of Queensland. The pipelines are full. So how will you get the gas out of Queensland? The other question on that front is you're looking at uncommitted gas. What do you think will happen to uncommitted gas in Queensland when you remove the incentives?
Chris, on the first question, this is why infrastructure is so key. And so much as our gas reservation policy has captured the imagination of many people, because it is really putting Australian gas for Australians first, you're right that we still have to get it to where it's needed. And that's why we talk about a comprehensive policy suite. One of the measures in that suite is a $1 billion critical infrastructure fund. Now, the priority for spending that money is going to be to try and accelerate and future-proof the infrastructure needed from north to south, Queensland to the southern markets. The second part of my answer to that would be time. The real risk is the winter peaks, which is why what we need to do is ensure we are maximising the transportation of gas from Queensland south.
Time to build the pipeline, which is how long?
So that was part of the first question. That will not solve for next year, which is why this second part is so key. Timing is key. So we need to get gas from Queensland south while we only have the existing infrastructure before winter hits. Now, the only way that's going to work is it needs to come down south prior to the peak, and storage becomes absolutely key. And that is something that we believe that we can get done.
This will be in place in the next 3 years?
In the next 3 years, in order to solve for that short-term problem. And the storage is going to be the key.
And you're committed to that?
In terms of enough storage over the next 3 years, yes. I think the real problem, Chris, to be honest, is we need to get the gas. We need to get the gas down.
Okay.
And I believe the reservation scheme will allow for that.
Next question, Tom Lowry from the ABC.
Thanks to both of you for being here today. Just firstly to the Minister, the idea of an East Coast gas reservation scheme does have a few friends on the progressive side of politics. The Australian Institute, who backed the Coalition's idea, probably surprising friends for Mr O'Brien. David Pocock's advocated for something similar. The Greens have made similar noises. Can you rule out considering an East Coast reservation scheme should you be re-elected?
Yeah, thanks, Tom, because what we've done is, I think the closest thing we have to a reservation is our policy, which is the gas code of conduct, which the opposition opposed. That is what has seen 640 petajoules of gas supply added domestically. So that is the closest thing we have to a reservation. It's not technically a reservation. I think it's the closest thing, much closer than Mr O'Brien's offering, which is, we now know, based on the evidence on the document he released yesterday, an incentive, not a reservation at all. So yes, I mean, I think the principle that there should be enough Australian gas for Australian users is a sound one. That's why we've taken the difficult decision to introduce the gas code of conduct. Wasn't easy, was controversial. Opposition and others opposed it. Opposition and the Greens opposed it. But we managed to get it through. And it has seen those 640 petajoules flow. And I think that's appropriate because we do need to ensure the right amount of gas for Australian industrial users in particular, as well as electricity and home heating. But industry is what really, I think, drives the need. And that's a good thing. So my answer to that would be, in effect, we have tackled that problem with the gas code of conduct.
And just briefly for Mr O'Brien, should the Coalition fall short of this election, and I know there's still weeks to go in this election campaign, would you end your advocacy for nuclear power? Would you take that as a rejection by the Australian people of nuclear energy?
Well, firstly, can I say that is a wild hypothetical.
Not as such, but...
Look, we are looking at pouring more gas in the short term and introducing nuclear in the near term, not because we're driven by polls, but because, hand on heart, that's in our national interest. It is the right thing to do. It is why other countries all around the world are now introducing nuclear energy. It's in Australia's interest, and therefore we have no intention of changing our view on that. We'll always have to focus on what is right for Australia.
If everything gets kicked back 3 years, which is what it would mean in that wild hypothetical, would it be too late at that point?
Tom, you're getting even more wild here. So, look, I don't want to tempt the suggestion that we should be delaying action here. Australia is already behind the 8 ball when it comes to zero emissions nuclear energy. The sooner we get going, the better. We have to remember that even though nuclear will take a good decade before it comes online, even so it has proven around the world to be the fastest way to decarbonise electricity grids, faster than any other form of technology through the historical examples. So we can't delay, we need to get on with it. And again, remembering it's not just about nuclear. It's working as a balanced energy mix with renewables, with gas.
Ryan Kropp from the AFR.
Hi, both. A question for both of you on power prices. Political leaders have been promising cuts to power prices for close to 20 years now, and it's fair to say that over that period prices have only gone up. Both of your parties have made promises to cut power prices. Given the scale of the task required to replace Australia's ageing coal-fired power fleet, do you think political leaders need to be more honest with voters about the costs of the transition? And are you concerned that repeated broken promises on prices will undermine the political support required to bring Australia's energy grid into the modern age?
Well, thanks, Ryan. I understand your question. That's why I was careful in the answer to the first question. It would have been easy for me to make a commitment about power prices when you've got geopolitical, economic environment changing so rapidly. I chose not to because it is difficult to predict. And you're right. You know, we said things in the last lecture. Angus Taylor said things at the 2019 election about power prices, which he missed by a country mile as well. That is correct that those promises have been made, including by Angus Taylor, and then he did hide an energy price rise at the last election, which I thought was the most cynical thing I've seen in politics. Look, what we say is, as I've said several times, I don't pretend this is easy. I mean, we're not doing this for fun. We're doing this because the planet depends on it and because it's a massive economic opportunity for our country. That's why. And because some fundamental things don't change. The fundamentals that renewables are the cheapest form of energy, even with the cost of storage, even with the cost of transmission, renewables remain the cheapest form of energy. That's what the science tells me. Others disagree, including some who've asked me questions today. But it's true. It happens to be true. Does that mean it's easy or without setbacks? No. But that fundamental truth remains. And that is why we have to stay the course on that, not the risky change of course to cap renewables at 54%, as Ted would like to do, and wait for nuclear, which might or might not work. It would take at least 12 years, even on his calculation. We choose a different course, which is, we say to the Australian people, the best way forward because it's based on all the science and evidence.
Oh, look, Ryan, you just asked both Chris Bowen and me a question about honesty. And Chris, your answer is full of lies, mate.
Well,
I mean, talking about
don't you agree
the coalition.
Don't you agree that renewables are the cheapest form of energy? What's in your modelling? It's in your modelling. 54%. It's in your document.
Here, Ryan, is the problem. I think you're spot on with your question. And at the end, I think you said something about, you didn't use the expression social licence, but in order for people to come on the journey, right? I believe a big problem we've seen over the last 3 years has been the treatment of regional Australia in particular, who's carrying the burden of Labor's policies. They've been steamrolled here. And you can't expect communities, let alone the whole country, to come with you when you treat them with reckless indifference. That also comes, therefore, to the energy transformation itself, which is why we've been very clear. Here are all our economic costings. This is what it is. Open for criticism. Here are all the assumptions. We did that last year in terms of the journey to 2050. We've done that when it comes to the gas policy. We've been very clear about some of the risks here. I mean, one of the biggest risks under Labor is the network charges, right? Which is why before I was saying our gas policy will get the wholesale down by 8%, but it's only about 3% of your retail bill. That's because Labor's building up to 28,000 kilometres of transmission lines. We don't know the impact yet next year on that.
Just very quickly, so frontier economic models have renewables at 54% of the energy mix. Is that your policy to cap renewables at that percent?
No, there's no policy that we have which is capping any technology. Again, it's why I refer to sort of, again, it's a dishonesty.
That means your modelling's wrong.
On Chris's behalf.
Your modelling's wrong or the policy's wrong. Both can't be true. Your modelling says 54%. Both can't be true.
Thanks for the tip, Chris. So, given, again, the modelling has been done, estimating the amount of technology from each energy source. And you're right, renewables are going to be key. So too will gas, so too will storage, so too will nuclear. But when you say cap, well, cap suggests that you put a firm level and no more. That's never been our policy. It's not our policy on gas. It's not our policy on renewables. It's not our policy on nuclear.
Dan Jevispati from The Guardian.
Just a couple of questions on targets. First to you, Mr O'Brien. So just to clarify, you've said that if you win the election, if you form government, that you'll commission an analysis into how we're tracking in terms of emissions reduction. If that analysis comes back, and I appreciate this is a hypothetical, but if the analysis comes back and shows that we're not on track for either 43%, 82% of renewables or net zero by 2050, the coalition would be prepared to submit new targets to the UN regardless of the implications for us in Paris.
So I'm glad at least your hypothetical isn't built on the other hypothetical that we don't win government. So my answer is same as what I said before. Our commitment is this. When it comes to establishing future targets, we need to account for three things. One, the trajectory of emissions. Two, the state of the Australian economy. And three, the suite of our policies, not Labor's policies. That will allow us to then understand the art of the possible. We want to ensure that we are growing this country, not, decarbonising it is good, deindustrialising it like Labor is bad. Once we've done that analysis, then we'll be making decisions along the lines that you pose. So I won't be preempting today, with all due respect, that hypothetical.
You're prepared, all of those things considered, that if it is in the national interest, to potentially leave Paris?
I can commit that we will always act in the national interest and we will be upfront with the Australian people.
Just very quickly to Mr Bowen, the Queensland Government has announced it's going to review its targets. If they were to walk away from their emissions reduction targets, how much harder would it be for Australia to achieve its targets?
Yeah, thanks, Dan, for the question. And I'm disappointed to hear Ted not answer because, in effect, he couldn't confirm staying in Paris or leaving, because if you change the 43% target, you're leaving Paris. But anyway, matter for him.
And you're happy for Australia to go broke along the way to achieve yours, Chris?
Matter for him. In relation to Queensland, there's a common misconception. I'm not criticising your question, but there's a common misconception that when we set national targets, we take into account the state targets. We don't. We don't take into account the state renewable energy targets because it's not simply a matter of adding them up and coming up with a national target. What we do is look through those targets and consider the impact of policies at the state level and the local level for that matter. And then that feeds into our national target. And we do that very carefully. So whether the Queensland Government changes its renewable energy target is frankly not material to our national target. Their policies are, and we will look at the implications of their announcements on Callide and see what that means for our projections, but that will be done in the normal course of events, and that will reflect. One of the things we've done that I'm pleased with is introduce much more transparency into the system. I give an annual report on projections and forecasts to Parliament, which is tabled, and it will all be reflected there.
All right, I've run things a little over budget myself. I'll ask you to stick with 1 minute for your final observations, if you will, beginning with you, Mr Bowen.
Well, thank you, Tom. It's been a great debate. In the last 3 years, I'm pleased with what we've been able to do, but not satisfied. We've got a lot more to do. When the Liberal Party left office, wholesale electricity prices were $317 and rising. Now they're $88. When they left office, gas was $34 a gigajoule, and now it's $14. The Liberals want to secure 50 petajoules of new gas. They say that's a great thing. We've already secured almost 650 petajoules. We've added the equivalent of more than 3 Snowy Hydro schemes worth of electricity to the grid. We've added more dispatchable electricity to the grid than the amount that Angus Taylor could do in a decade. We've all done that in 3 years. Under the last government, 24 coal-fired plants announced their closure dates, but the LNP failed to plan for the future. They failed any replacement electricity. That's why they oversaw 4 gigawatts of dispatchable energy leaving the grid and only 1 come on. We've done a lot, but there's a lot more to do. We need to stay the course, we need to listen to the experts, and that's what we'll do if we get a second term.
When Peter Dutton says that he wants to get Australia back on track, he's talking very much about the Australian economy, because the economy isn't an end unto itself. It's the means by which we can ensure families which are struggling today can have an easier life. It means that we can ensure that vital services are provided to the Australian public, and it means that businesses can grow. But none of that can happen if we continue going down Labor's path when it comes to energy. An all eggs in one basket, renewables only approach is already failing, leaving Australians to pay among the highest electricity prices in the world. The Coalition has a plan. It's the only party of government that has a plan and the economics to back it up, to ensure that Australia can have a balanced energy mix with cheaper, cleaner and consistent 24/7 power, so that not just cost of living is eased, but our future is one that is rich and not poor, strong and not weak, and fiercely independent, not dependent on foreign supply chains. Thanks for listening today.
Gentlemen, thank you both for coming. You get to, of course, you've contributed to democracy. That's your reward, as well as membership of the club. You can perhaps book a table together and have a chat about energy policy. Please shake hands. Please, everyone, welcome. Thanks, Ted and Chris O'Brien, for coming along.